Really happy to be here. Thank you, Andrew, for the talk. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. I am Ryan Etten, as Scott just mentioned. I'm the Senior Architect and Team Lead at Red Hat and the Cloud Native Madison Organizer as well. So I'm also very happy to hear about somebody saying earlier, how do I get started with GitOps? Hopefully this talk here is for you. So I used to dread those late night YAML edits, hand roll deploys, but then GitOps changed everything for me. So risk dropped, confidence soared, and I myself began as a skeptic, and now I guide Fortune scale teams through adoption, and I watch them rack up the same wins. So I want to share those same learnings here with you today. In the next 25 minutes, we're going to hit on three main themes. We'll first briefly introduce GitOps to those who may be new to it. We'll look at the tangible problems that GitOps solves, things like drift, slow change cycles, and painful audits. And then we'll quickly cover some of the high-level mechanics. So that declarative model, pull-based deployments, and then continuous reconciliation. And then finally, we'll dive into the main part of the talk, take a look at some practical patterns, real-world examples, and a simple playbook that you can use to get started with GitOps tomorrow. So let's start by setting the stage. Why do we even need GitOps? Well, many enterprises today deploy their applications using manual or semi-manual processes, and they wrestle with configuration drift that causes outages, manual change processes that stretch release cycles into weeks, and then audits that really turn into wild goose chases because there's no single authoritative record of what actually ran in production. So every typo, every unrecorded hotfix, every hand-typed kubectl command compounds that risk. So GitOps was born to tackle all of these by centralizing your desired state, automating deployments, and then giving you an immutable audit trail. So at its core, GitOps treats your Git repository as the one true source of truth for both your infrastructure and application configurations. You express everything declaratively in YAML or JSON, submit changes via pull requests, and then once those PRs are approved and merged, an in-cluster operator like Argo CD or Flux is going to pull those updated manifests and apply them. So manual tweaks in production become a thing of the past, and your clusters will continuously reconcile back to what is defined in Git. So now that we know some of those principles, let's briefly take a look at how GitOps actually looks in practice, especially compared to those traditional models. Traditionally, our CI/CD uses a push model, so we merge our code, then the pipeline is going to push those changes out with highly privileged credentials. But with GitOps, we invert that into a pull model. So that agent that is inside our environment reads the repo with read-only Git credentials, and then it self-heals by applying whatever it finds. So that separation then means that our build system never is going to need direct access to prod. Drift will be detected and corrected automatically, and then our deployments will become more predictable and secure. For enterprises, GitOps brings a few big wins. So that immutable Git history is going to give you a built-in paper trail that will satisfy auditors without any extra effort. Rollbacks can become as simple as this little Git revert, so then you can recover from incidents in seconds. And because we trust that process, you can ship more often. So teams report deploying multiple times a day instead of once a month without increasing downtime. So you really can have speed and safety together. So now that we have that minimal baseline, it's time to play devil's advocate. So if you're an enterprise skeptic, you probably have some of these fears in mind. A common gripe that we see is, oh no, not hundreds of YAML files. Well, Kubernetes and infrastructure as code already have introduced a lot of config text, and GitOps could increase that. In fact, some teams have even reported that as soon as they start to evolve a little bit more into A/B testing deployments, it's led to a 200 to 500% increase in the number of YAML files that they have to manage. So that's a real concern. There's more configs, which means more complexity and upkeep, and engineers will fear that they drown in templating, customized overlays, and endless code reviews for minor YAML tweaks. So this can really be demoralizing if it's not handled well. There's loss of control, which is psychological as much as technical. So the idea of an autonomous system continuously deploying changes can be scary. So there's a fear of losing manual intervention capabilities. So if everything is automated, can I intervene quickly when something is wrong? And some people worry that trusting a robot or a little GitOps agent might mean that they're unaware of changes until after the fact. So in essence, this is just a fear of the unknown. We're relinquishing our traditional hands-on control for a new model. From a compliance standpoint, enterprises and regulated sectors have their established processes, so the idea of allowing code to auto-deploy might seem incompatible with that. They want to ensure that only their approved changes go out and that separations of duties remains. Security teams might also be concerned about granting an agent in the cluster access to pull from Git and make changes. Is this even secure? And then if auditors come knocking, are they even going to accept that it's in Git will be enough evidence, or are we going to violate some protocol by not having a human in the loop at deployment time? These are all valid questions when you have decades of governance built around older practices. Moreover, as I'm sure most of us are familiar with, GitOps, containers, Kubernetes, they come with a learning curve. So the ops teams that you have might be great at managing VMs and writing bash scripts, but not as familiar with Git workflows or writing YAML manifests. Or developers might not be thinking about infrastructure as code. So there can also be a cultural gap to this. The ops folks just don't want to become developers writing pull requests, and devs don't want to deal with ops configs. So there's a fear that adopting GitOps will require significant retraining and even redefinition of roles. So if this isn't addressed, this can indeed be a barrier. People are going to resist what they feel unprepared for. And then finally, enterprises have a lot invested in their current CI/CD pipelines, approval processes, and so on. So if you have a beloved Jenkins pipelines or a ServiceNow ticketing for changes, is GitOps going to be an all or nothing replacement? The worry is that adopting GitOps could break down integration with those or require a big bang change, which is going to sound risky and costly. So overall, these fears are all legitimate. I've heard all of them over the past several years. Truthfully, I had a few of them of my own. But the good news is that each of these concerns can be addressed with the right approach. So let's take a look at how teams can overcome these and build their trust in GitOps. So we will do that by tackling those fears one by one with strategies that real teams have used to build confidence. If you worry about YAML overload, the answer is better tooling and conventions. So rather than writing hundreds of nearly similar manifest files, teams take advantage of templating tools like Helm charts or Kustomize to help avoid that repetition. So these tools will allow you to define templates for your configs and then just provide environment-specific values, significantly cutting down on that duplication. Additionally, we can structure our Git repositories in an organized way. We can go directory per environment or application, and we can really make things clear where things live. Some organizations even go further and build higher level abstractions or internal developer platforms. Essentially, these are just interfaces or generators that most developers rarely have to write raw YAML. So the key here is that you don't have to handcraft every file. We generate and reuse as much as possible. So by doing this, teams have kept their configuration sprawl under control, even as they scaled GitOps. So yes, YAML is going to be there, but it's managed in the same way. So remember, the payoff, though, is that those configs are what are going to give you repeatability and consistency. We can maintain our control with guardrails. GitOps does not mean wild, wild west automation, so we can enforce plenty of controls. Andrew spoke about a few of those a little bit earlier. For one, we can require that all those changes go through a pull request approval process before they actually affect an environment. So for example, maybe your developers can freely commit to a dev branch. This is going to auto deploy to a dev environment, but then anything that's destined for production will go through a protected branch that requires approval. So this way, there's no change that's going to sneak into production without any human eyes on it. Additionally, we have that concept of policy as code. So tools like the Open Policy Agent or our admission controllers can automatically check proposed config changes against company policies. You could have a policy that states that no database password should ever be in plain text in a config. So if somebody tries that, an automated check will then reject that commit or the deployment. So these guardrails mean that automation is doing exactly what you would manually do, just faster and more consistently. And you'll still have your manual override capabilities. You can pause that GitOps sync if needed, or you can even make an emergency manual change and then backport that to Git, though we want to minimize doing that. So the bottom line, you set the rules and the automation follows them. You're not losing control, you're just formalizing it. We can turn compliance into a benefit. So interestingly, teams find that after adopting GitOps, their audits are actually becoming easier. Since every change is tracked in Git, we can prepare evidence for compliance audits by as easy as pulling that Git log and then highlighting the approvals that were there. Some companies have even integrated their change management process with GitOps, as it provides that valuable evidence related to change management and helps maintain adherence to those standards. Furthermore, by centralizing everything in one platform, you simplify those compliance checks. So security teams can just review your repos and see that all infrastructure is defined and compliant. So over time, compliance folks will often become comfortable with what they see. That GitOps brings more rigor than those ad hoc scripts because it has features like mandatory code reviews, automated tests, etc., all baked in. We can address that learning curve by starting small and learning by doing. So pick a non-critical application or an internal service as a pilot project for GitOps. By doing this, your team can experiment, make mistakes, and gain confidence without jeopardizing critical systems. Meanwhile, it's important to invest in training. So teach your ops folks some Git basics, teach your devs some ops concepts, and you might even designate a few of the enthusiastic team members as internal GitOps champions, or you may even form a GitOps Center of Excellence or community of practice. These are people that can help you develop best practices and help others on the team. When your colleagues start to see those quick wins, say that pilot project recovering from an issue with one Git revert or a dramatic cut in deployment time, they'll be more open to trying it themselves. All that said, it is important to remember that this mindset shift doesn't happen overnight, but with each small success, true trust in the process really does start to grow. And then most importantly, you don't have to throw away your current tools to adopt GitOps. So in fact, GitOps plays nicely with your traditional CI/CD. You can often keep your CI for building and testing, and then just let GitOps handle that deployment part. You should also roll out GitOps gradually, so maybe start with dev and staging environments, while in production, you still use the old way until you gain more confidence. Or adopt GitOps for just microservices, while those legacy apps stick to the old process for now. Then as time goes on and confidence builds, start to migrate more systems, and GitOps will become an extension of your process naturally. So overall, all of these strategies are about building trust in the tools, in the process, and then in your team's ability to run with GitOps. So I want to walk through about 3 real-world snapshots from customer projects that I've handled since 2022, each of them sitting on a different point on their GitOps journeys. Quick disclaimer here, these stages that I'm about to talk about aren't actually lifted from any formal maturity model or framework. They're just simply natural clusters that I've noticed teams falling into over time that are useful for this talk. And I suspect that you'll recognize at least one of them in your own organizations. To start off, one financial institution that I worked with is the textbook denial case. So their governance model is a relic of the pre-cloud era. Every change waited for the Friday approval call. Ops would then SSH into prod. They'd run Helm by hand, and then they'd watch their dashboards until morning. Management here felt that the auditors wanted to see human sign-offs, not a bot, and they even pointed to their perfect audit record as a proof that the system works, even though new features crawled out monthly and weakened over time was a given. So reality intruded for them when a defect surfaced after somebody hot patched a config map directly in production. Something then overwrote that patch a week or 2 later, and then issues started cascading almost instantly. So that outage laid bare the flaw in their faith. All of those manual gates that they had still let drift creep in, and recovery took hours because nobody knew where that live state had diverged from the docs. The incident, however, planted a seed. So leadership remained publicly skeptical. GitOps was too risky. It's not compliant. But we closed out our engagement with a mini pilot to expand on later that was pushed by a few on the team with a renewed interest in GitOps. So how did that look? Well, telling the bank to flip everything to GitOps on Monday would have triggered outright revolt. So in our recommendations, we framed a tiny experiment that any skeptic could tolerate. We guided the bank to an internal performance reporting microservice. It was something that was important enough to matter, yet isolated from the customer traffic. That single service was moved into a dedicated Git repository, and then Argo CD was installed in preview mode, which just had its syncing disabled. So to start, what we did is we had Argo show the diffs, but it made 0 changes. The engineers had to click sync manually, and this helped us remove that robots gone wild fear while still capturing every commit SHA, the author, and the approval chain that was needed for the auditors. Next, we cleverly surfaced drift. So Grafana Paddle compared the staging and prod hashes and replica counts. So the goal here was to alert on when prod jumped ahead of staging and replicas, showcasing that drift was now both undeniable and measurable. Crucially, we preserved our failback, so their weekend scripts were retained and placed in a read-only break glass folder, and then knowing that a human could still SSH in if Argo was misbehaving would help those auditors sleep at night. We also front-loaded 2 common pitfalls. First, no big bang migration. So looking ahead, we scoped and limited Argo to just a few additional services per quarter, helping keep that controller load and change fatigue manageable. Second, we wrote a git revert runbook before that pilot was to touch prod. So every commit tag, kubectl command, expected reconciliation time, etc. So when that first rollback inevitably would come, senior management could then hopefully finally see that automation outperforms humans. So these were all deliberate incremental wins that chipped away at skepticism, and denial began giving way to more curiosity. Another client, a large retailer that processes millions of transactions a day, sat squarely in the let's try this phase. So a handpicked DevSecOps crew spun up a pilot on a single service. Argo CD watched a signed Git repo, auto-synced to staging, and then after a few tests passed, it promoted that exact commit SHA to production. For them, the results landed fast. So releases that once dribbled in once or twice a month were now shipping daily. And even when a bad environment value slipped through, one of their git reverse reset prod in just under 2 minutes. After I rolled off, they reached back out after a load test showed the controller lag around 45 apps. So they flipped Argo into HA mode and scaled Redis to fix it, and it proved that that stack could stretch. So the verdict here was that that pilot was stamped as a success. The developers were quickly asking when their services can hop on board. So the important takeaway here is that each small win will chip away at resistance, and it will help you demonstrate that GitOps can marry speed with trust. So let's look at the details of this one. So while some are more technical by nature, I want to speak to them at a high level so you can see how teams can get creative when adopting GitOps. So if you'd like some more details on these, please reach out after the talk. I'd really love to chat further. That said, when this retailer stepped into its experimentation phase, they resisted the urge to flip the GitOps switch overnight. And instead, their first move was to build a minimal queue-length schema, barely a couple hundred lines, that mirrored only the Helm values that they actually needed. So every pull request that they had ran queue-vet. So type mismatches, missing keys, out-of-range numbers, all failed fast in CI rather than exploding in their live clusters. So that tiny little DSL gave them compile time guardrails without adding a new runtime dependency. Next, they treated Argo CD like a scoped preview tool before allowing it to touch anything. So by keeping that sync disabled for the first sprint, the engineers could open up the Argo UI, inspect that diff between Git and the cluster, and then reject changes that didn't look right. Finally, the process discipline mattered just as much as tooling. So the team also wrote a living cutover runbook while everything was fresh. That said, they did hit a few bumps. So around the 45 application mark, those reconciliation loops started lagging behind their 30-second SLO. So load testing revealed that the controller and Redis were undersized, and they enabled Argo's HA and scaled that backing store before rolling out wider. And then that lightweight little QLane DSL had missed a few things in the beginning, but they patched that schema in a day. So the lesson that we can take from there is that abstractions evolve. So expect rapid iterations rather than a one and done spec. So in the end, all of these guardrails were instrumental in their move toward full GitOps adoption. Then lastly, let's look at some success at scale for a healthcare company. A few years ago, leadership okayed a cautious GitOps pilot on a non-critical service. And today, every one of their Kubernetes clusters, dev, QA, staging, and multiple production replicas all run Flux agents that reconcile continuously to GitLab. So there's nothing outside an approved merge request that lasts beyond the next sync. Essentially, if it's not in Git, then it doesn't exist. That discipline delivers hard numbers. So their feature lead time is down roughly 30% because their teams ship small peer-reviewed increments several times a week instead of bundling those monthly drops. And their stability has improved in parallel. So their deployment-related incidents are about half what they were a few years ago. Their HIPAA auditors now receive change logs, SBOMs, and cosign signatures straight from GitLab. So it's that proof of who shipped what, when, and under which policy gates. Open Policy Agent enforces encryption, their library versions, and other safeguards at pull request time. And then they take advantage of external secrets, which injects their credentials at runtime, keeping sensitive data out of Git, but still under reconciliation. Operationally, they run environment-wide syncs, so there's no unofficial canaries, so staging in both prod clusters track the exact same commit. Their policy sprawl threatened to explode, so they also centralize hundreds of OPA's Rego rules into a single versioned library. So overall, the outcome there was a cultural payoff rooted in trust. Every change now has an author, a review, and an audit trail. There's no more mystery tweaks. There's no more finger pointing. And I bet if you were to ask this company today, I think they would tell you they can't imagine running their hybrid cloud any other way. And the repo earned that trust by delivering faster and safer healthcare software. So what are the takeaways here at this stage? Well, by the time the company had reached full acceptance, they leveled up beyond their basic GitOps hygiene. So first, they enforce their environment-wide sync. Every environment points to that same commit SHA. So if staging is green, both the prod regions should be green and all of their surprises disappear. Next, they have that automated policies and secrets. So every merge request runs through the Open Policy Agent gates that look for insecure settings, while their external secrets injects credentials at runtime. This will help keep that sensitive data out of Git, yet still under reconciliation. So compliance at this point is no longer an afterthought, and it's wired into every pull request. For their supply chain assurance, they layered in SBOMs and image signing. So co-signing will sign all the containers, SIF to generate the SBOM, and then both of those artifacts live together in GitLab next to their manifests. And this also helps those auditors with a one-click proof of their provenance and component list, and no more scrambling before their audits. They also learned the hard way to centralize their policies. So every success spawned hundreds of one-off Rego files that were scattered across repos, and it was just impossible for them to maintain. So refactoring into a single version library helped keep the rules consistent and reviewable. Then finally, when they retired the legacy workloads, they coordinated their cutovers with temp deployment names and then scheduled some traffic switch windows. So the lesson here is that even at full acceptance, GitOps still isn't set it and forget it. We still need thoughtful policy design, capacity planning, and human-friendly rituals to keep the system and the people healthy. So by now, hopefully you're thinking this sounds promising, but how do I actually do this in my company without breaking anything? Well, here's a brief game plan for you to get started with GitOps in an enterprise setting while minimizing risk and reinforcing many of the themes that we already touched on a little bit today. So first, start with a pilot project. Don't try to boil the ocean. Pick one application or one environment as your GitOps pilot. Ideally, we want to choose something that's important enough to matter so that we can demonstrate value, but not the crown jewels that would cause a disaster if something went wrong. So a development or a QA environment is a great sandbox, and if you're feeling confident, a less critical production app could even work as well. So the idea here is to contain the experiment so that any of your mistakes are limited in blast radius, and this is going to also help you focus, so you can work out those kinks on a smaller scale. Second, form a cross-functional team. So GitOps is at the intersection of dev and ops, so make sure your pilot team has both software engineers and operations or DevOps engineers. So perhaps there's that developer who's keen on infrastructure as code, and an ops engineer who's open to coding. Pair them up. Assign a GitOps champion, someone that's passionate about this, that will drive the effort, coordinate the learning, and then document the progress. And then remember to invest in a little bit of training up front. Get your teams familiar with the chosen GitOps tools, be it RHCA, Flux, or another, and then refresh everybody on the Git workflows if needed. Third, take advantage of familiar tools. So reduce that shock by using the tech the team is already comfortable with. If you're already on Kubernetes, that is a natural fit for tools, GitOps with tools like RHCA and Flux because they were built for Kubernetes. If you use Terraform for infrastructure, there are some GitOps style workflows that you can use as well. Use those existing Git repository hosting providers that you have. So GitLab, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you use internally. We don't want our developers to have to learn a new VCS. Pipeline-wise, continue using your CI system for building and testing apps, and then just augment it to update those configs in Git as the trigger for your deployment. So in short, integrate GitOps into your current ecosystem rather than introducing an entire new universe all at once. Fourth, set your conventions and guardrails early. So in the pilot, define how you're going to want to organize your Git repos, mono-repos or multi-repos for configs. How are your promotions between environments going to work? Do we want to issue a PR from a dev branch to a prod branch? What rules must be followed? Like, do we need code owners at certain paths or policies with no plain text secrets in Git? And it's easier for us to build good habits from the beginning than to refactor later on. Also, I strongly encourage you to consider enabling those simple safety checks. For example, set up branch protection so nobody can push to the main prod branch without review. And if you're using a tool like OPA or even simple CI lint checks, configure these in the pilot. These standards will ensure that as you guys expand GitHops, you won't introduce chaos and everybody will know the right way to do things. And then finally, measure, iterate, and showcase. So this is something that I've noticed that is overlooked far too often. During the pilot, gather data and anecdotes. Did your deployment time drop? Did you catch an error via code review that would have slipped through before? Did a rollback save the day? Capture your quantitative metrics, like we deployed 5 times this week instead of 1 time, or we had 0 instance in this pilot this quarter versus 2 instance last quarter. All of these things speak loudly to management. Don't forget to collect the qualitative feedback as well from the team. Maybe a developer says, this makes my life so much easier, or an ops person says, I spent much less time on routine tasks. Use all of these to refine your process. Perhaps you might learn that developers need a template for writing good config PRs, or that ops need a dashboard to monitor the GitOps status. Implement those improvements. And then most importantly, celebrate your successes. Demo the pilot's outcome to broader stakeholders. Show them how a config change flowed from Git and into an environment reliably. When others see it working, it demystifies GitOps and it builds support. After you have a successful pilot, you can start by expanding to other services or teams. Some organizations go application by application. Others might do it environment by environment, i.e. all apps go in staging via GitOps first, then we move to production. Choose what makes sense for your culture. Then the gradual approach will mean that you still have that old process as a failback during the transition. And over time, as your confidence grows, GitOps moves from pilot to the default way of working. It's evolution, not revolution, and that's how you minimize disruption while innovating. So we covered a lot, so I want to wrap up with just a couple of takeaways. We have a few minutes to go. So if you haven't caught on by now, GitOps is about trust. Trust in the automation, trust in the process, and then ultimately trust in the single source of truth the Git repository. GitOps is not a magic bullet or a one-size-fits-all framework imposed by vendors. It really is an evolution of good DevOps practices. We're taking what we know works in software development, our version control, code review, and automation, and we're applying it to infrastructure and operations. So the result is deployments that are more repeatable, audible, and reliable. For our infrastructure enterprise folks on the audience, remember that you can adopt GitOps at your own pace. You don't have to flip the whole organization in a day. So start with that one app or one team, and then use the tools and workflows that your people are comfortable with and incrementally introduce those practices. Address your fears proactively. So show how YAML sprawl can be managed, how control is actually enhanced via approvals and policies, how your compliance is strengthened with better logs, and how your team can grow into this new approach with training and patience. So in doing so, I believe you'll find that many skeptics, maybe the ops veterans or those compliance operators, will gradually come around when they see the benefits realized in practice. I personally used to worry a lot about deployments going wrong, about whether we missed a step in a run book, about 2 a.m. outages, and adopting GitOps felt scary at first because it was new, and I had to relinquish some old habits. But after going through it on my own and working with dozens of teams, I quickly realized that GitOps gave us more control in a meaningful way. We could see every change clearly. We had quick recourse if something went wrong, and our systems became more stable. So basically, I learned to stop worrying and trust the repo. So that is all I have. Thank you for listening, and I hope I have inspired you to explore GitOps further. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to continue this conversation. And I think we might have a minute or two for any QA if we have some. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Yes, we do have, well, about 1 minute for Q&A, but we can continue to answer those in the chat after.
Perfect, yeah.
So I think I actually don't know if I'm if I'm really navigating this correctly. I know one is how and when do you integrate observability into the GitOps journey? There are several of these, but maybe that's a good one.
Good, as early as you can. That's probably the best thing that I would recommend there. Yeah, so that is a critical component. That goes back to those DORA metrics and things that we want to capture. So observability right away would be my recommendation. Good question. And yeah, please keep those chats coming or reach out to me and we'll continue that conversation as well. Thank you so much.